So welcome, everyone. I'm Allison B.A. Thank you for joining us for In the News this week. Before we get started with our official program, I'd like to invite two very special people up to the stage. From our amazing co-sponsor at Colby Votes, we have Olivia and Anthony. Woo!
Thank you so much, and good evening, everybody. We're so excited to see so many people here tonight. My name is Olivia Olchin. I'm one of the 4 Colby Votes Fellows, and I'm also on the Goldfarb Student Advisory Board.
And my name is Anthony Simescu, and I'm also a Colby Votes Fellow. And Olivia and I just wanted to come up here and give a quick PSA on voting. Voting is one of the most direct and impactful ways we can shape our future, not only on the federal level, but on the state and local levels as well. And this is especially true for a state like Maine, which has a long-standing tradition of grassroots, community-driven politics. The youth vote has real power. We have the numbers and the energy to change the needle on critical issues. And so we want to encourage each and every one of you to reflect this energy at the polls this election season. When we turn out to vote, we can change the entire conversation. And the way we show up, the choices we make now will set the tone for a lifetime of active participation in our democracy.
All right, I've got some more reminders. So as a Colby student, everyone here is able to vote either absentee by mail in their home state or in the state of Maine. In the state of Maine, you're able to register to vote online until October 15th, but once that deadline is passed, you're still able to register in person on Election Day at the polls. If you can't make it to Election Day, Waterville offers early in-person voting from October 7th to October 31st at the Waterville City Hall Annex. That runs from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. daily. The City Hall Annex is just a 5-minute walk away from the Alphon Commons shuttle stop. And speaking of shuttles, on Election Day, we will have a shuttle that is going to take everyone from the Pew Center stop directly to our polling place, which is the Thomas College Athletic Center, right? Same name, yeah, so don't get confused. It's not our athletic center. If you're planning to vote absentee, please check out our Instagram at Colby College Votes because the date to request your absentee ballot varies. We're so excited that everybody is here today. Our vote matters. Election Day is Tuesday, November 5th. We'll see you there.
Thank you very much, Anthony and Olivia. I think those of you who have been around campus have seen the incredible work that Colby Votes is doing. We've been a leader on student voting for years, and it seems like you all are just gearing up to be like an incredible force for the state. So congratulations, and thank you for all the support you've done for this series. So now we're going to get on with the rest of our evening's discussion. I'm so happy to be to be on the stage with Secretary Shenna Bellows, who is our Secretary of State, and Michael Shepard, who is the political editor for the Bangor Daily News, and of course, everyone knows Docs, so we've got Docs here as our student moderator, and I'm so happy that he's joined us and that we'll be having this conversation. So we have a lot to cover. I could spend the whole hour talking to them, so I won't do that. But I just want to say that Secretary Shenna Bellows has been was sworn into office in 2021, but she served 2 terms in the state legislature before that, and served. We actually had the same job at one point, but not at the same time. She was the head of a human rights advocacy organization here in Maine, and has a very dedicated career to civic engagement and service to our state. We're very grateful. Michael Shepard, a proud graduate of UMaine and the editor of the school paper, right? And got his start there, and has been working in Maine politics and reporting for the Bangor Daily for a number of years. So 2 wildly experienced people in Maine who we're very lucky to have on the stage. So with that, I'm going to start with Madam Secretary. So, I mean, I think we say this every election, but this election actually does feel like one of the most consequential elections of a lifetime. And we're hearing so much about election integrity, election security, do people's votes, are they going to count? What are you able to do as a Secretary of State? Like, what are you seeing, and what are you able to do to make sure that our votes count, that there's integrity, and are you worried at all?
I'm not worried at all.
Oh, sorry, I've got to put your mic on. I think I told you all to keep your mics off. I apologize. You can all put them on.
My mics were not on for eating, but now they're on. So I am not worried at all. And part of it is the work that folks like Olivia and Anthony are doing. I was here on Colby's campus on National Voter Registration Day. I was so impressed. The food truck was awesome. The voter registration efforts were even more awesome. And Allison, when you say that Colby often leads the state in student voter registration and participation, you are absolutely correct. And I issue this challenge. Maine was #1 in the nation in voter participation in 2022. I am working hard to try to make Maine #1 in voter participation so that more voters turn out per capita than any other state in 2024. How about here at Colby, you try to be the campus with the highest percentage of students registering and participating in voting.
I think you could do it, right? You could do it.
Challenge accepted. So let's talk about what a Secretary of State does to protect the elections. The truth of the matter is it's the civil service that is running the elections. What do I mean by that? I mean the people that work in government who are not elected, who are not politicians, working at both the state level and in the cities and towns all across the state. So here in Waterville, you've got a great clerk, Patty Du Bois. At the state level, I have a team of people. We actually have the most experienced elections director in the country, Julie Flynn. She's done this under Democratic and Republican secretaries of state. They're the ones drafting the ballots, preparing the ballots, testing the voting machines, getting all of the materials out to the town so that you can go and conduct your voter registration and vote. They're the ones processing, like you go online, you register to vote, you think boom, 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 I'm done, which is great. We love maine.gov/vote, which is the online voter registration portal. They are looking at every element of that data and checking it, checking your identity and residency and verifying you. So I have a lot of confidence because at the backbone of our democracy is this incredible network of people who are tireless about elections, and they've been working on elections now for 2 years. As secretary, I have 2 hugely important roles in addition to the certification of the election. One of my roles is election protection, so looking at election security. We've done a lot of security planning with our clerk, some tabletop the votes, emergency management situations. And another one of my important roles is outreach and education to make sure that voters have the facts, that they know that we have paper ballots, for example, the gold standard in election security, and that voters have the information that they need to participate. So I'll stop there. I could talk a lot more.
That's great. So now we know we can rest assured the election is in good hands. Thank you. And I totally echo the clerks and the workers in the towns. I mean, they do an incredible service to our state and our country, so I agree. So just pivot for a second. So the ballot's protected, but what is on the ballot? Can you as our political reporter, can you talk a little bit about any of the questions on the ballot that you think are particularly interesting? And then, what I'm reading is that both the state legislature, the House and the Senate, have been democratically controlled, but the House is really at play. So can you just give us like a little bit of a sense of what we should be paying attention to?
Yeah, obviously the presidential election is beating us all over the head right now, and we have a big role to play in that because of the 2nd congressional district. We are one of 2 states, right, that break the state down by congressional district and award electors that way. So that one elector from the 2nd congressional district, just north of here, is really in play, and it also has one of the biggest congressional races in the country, Jared Golden versus Austin Terrio. It's just outside of Waterville, but still, certainly one of the biggest elections in the nation this year, and with control of the House of Representatives certainly at play. We have some really interesting smaller questions on the ballot too that aren't getting as much attention. The state flag, you've probably heard a fair bit about that. We also have question 1, which is a campaign finance referendum. It limits contributions to political action committees that play in elections. It limits the contributions to $5,000, and those are unlimited now. There's a lot on the ballot. The Maine legislature, we have one of the most competitive legislatures in the country. The House is a little closer right now, both controlled by Democrats since 2018. But we're in a pretty tight race on the House side. Senate probably is not in play this year, but there's so much on the ballot. That's what makes Maine fun, interesting. It's why we do this. It's a lot of fun to watch and see how politics play out here.
Yeah, I guess I'll pick up from there. I'll shift a little bit. Secretary Bellows, you mentioned a little bit earlier that voter turnout in Maine is one of the highest, right? And that's amazing. But with that being said, there are still barriers to voter engagement, particularly in the younger generation, but also in marginalized communities. What steps are being taken to kind of address that and ensure that all Mainers can participate in this coming election?
I'm glad you mentioned that. And one of the things that we're really doing is thinking about accessibility. How do we improve accessibility at the polls on election day and also ahead of that? And so we, with voter registration as secretary, I'm really excited about the policy work we've been able to do to break down barriers by implementing automatic voter registration at the Bureau of Motor Vehicles. We did that in 2022. So now if people go to get a Maine driver license or an ID, and you're a United States citizen and a resident of the state, which we're verifying at the BMV, the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, you get offered that option to register to vote right there. And that has been huge, both for voter registration and also for cleaning up our voter lists. Because when people move, when you move from dorm to dorm, you're not calling the city clerk, Patty Du Bois, to be like, hey, I moved from this dorm to this dorm. But if you go get your new license, you're going to update your residency on your license. So it's helped us clean up the voter rolls and helped us register more voters. Online voter registration is new this year. Again, I'm so excited that I and my team and the legislature and Governor Mills were able to move that forward because when Taylor Swift invited everybody to register to vote, the next day we saw over 2,400 voter registrations in a single day. That's a record. That was a record to that date. National Voter Registration Day, again, we saw over 2,400 registrations, so we were excited about that. I shared that information with the clerks today at a statewide conference in Augusta, and I saw some of the veterans go, wow, because they hadn't seen that level of registration in a single day. So it's breaking down those barriers. In terms of how to vote, we this summer had our clerks do an audit of their polling places to take a look at accessibility for people with disabilities, seniors, people with different needs, to make any adjustments that needed to be made, whether it's as simple as signage or more serious physical adjustments to polling places. We also have in every single polling place something called the Express Vote, which is a machine that allows, it's a touchscreen voting machine. It still issues a paper ballot, but if you're really not a fan of filling out a form, or if you have some sort of disability that it would be better for you to listen to the ballot or utilize a touchscreen, you've got that option in the polling place. And for people with print disabilities who are blind or otherwise visually impaired, we have an online accessible ballot system where from the comfort of their own home, with their own computer, their own supports, they can receive a ballot, make their decisions, and put that in a secure ballot drop box. So those are a few of the innovations. We're also focused on voter outreach. So I've been doing extensive voter outreach. I'll go anywhere I'm asked in the state and everywhere that I can. But we've been doing a lot of events with new Mainers and, really emphasizing you do have to be a United States citizen and a resident of the state of Maine and 18 or over on election day itself. But other than that, Maine doesn't have any exceptions to voter registration. We're one of 2 states in the nation, Maine and Vermont, where every citizen has the right to vote, no exceptions. Doesn't matter if you have a felony record, doesn't matter if you're incarcerated. If you're a United States citizen and you're a resident of our state, you're a student, you can vote here.
That is absolutely lovely to hear. As a newly registered voter in Maine, I'm not from here, and I think it's very, very, very cool that you bring that up. I mean, Maine is such a special place to vote, right? So another thing I learned after coming to Colby is ranked choice voting. Never heard of it, didn't really know what it was. Can you tell us what is ranked choice voting? And then on top of that, how has it affected, voting trends over the past couple of years, and more importantly, how it's affected engagement and, candidate strategy, more importantly?
I can speak to what is ranked choice voting and talk a little bit big picture about trends and strategies, and then Mike, if you wanted to add based on your observations of the political world more closely. So ranked choice voting is a method of voting where you rank your candidates. It doesn't preclude just picking just one. You're going to see a ranked choice voting style ballot for president, for Congress, and for United States Senate this year in Maine. We did that in 2020 as well for the presidential race, but people forget because they think about it as a binary. There are actually 5 presidential candidates on the ballot this year in Maine. So what you will see on the ballot is you will see those presidential candidates listed in alphabetical order, And then you will see first choice, second choice, third choice, fourth choice, fifth choice. And you can pick just one, and that counts. You can pick one all the way across, still counts, doesn't get any extra credit, but you can do that. Or you can pick your first choice, your second choice, your third choice, your fourth choice, your fifth choice, or just the first two, or however you want to do that. If on election night, a candidate receives 50% of the vote plus one vote, that's it, it's over. And that's based on the first choice totals for all of the towns. Now, Maine splits our electoral votes, so we'll be counting those votes in the first congressional district for one electoral vote, in the second, and Mike mentioned this earlier, in the second congressional district for the other, and statewide for 2 electoral votes. So I'll just go to 2020 for a minute. In 2020, Biden got more than 50% in CD1, which is the district that you're all in, Congressional District 1. He got more than 50% statewide, but Trump got more than 50% in Congressional District 2, north of here. So Trump got 1 electoral vote, Biden got 3. We didn't go to ranked choice voting for that. In 2024, it could be a hotter race. It could be closer. And so you might see a candidate getting only 49% of the vote, say hypothetically in Congressional District 2. You might see one candidate getting 49% and being in the lead in CD2, and a different candidate getting 48% statewide and being in the lead in statewide.
It's 3 different elections. I think that's helpful to think about it that way. Right,
Yeah, that's exactly right. So what would happen is then, after the election night results are reported, we at the state level would collect all of the ballots and all of the memory devices, which are like USB drives, but they're not USB drives, that are in the tabulators for the machines across the state. Law enforcement will transport those to a secure facility at the state level, and we will look at those second choices. So what happens is the least popular candidate, the 5th candidate, their votes get set aside, and it goes to their second choice. And you do that again for you keep going least and taking off the person on the bottom until you have somebody that gets 50% plus 1 of all of the votes.
And on the mechanics of that, I think it's helpful for you to note too that Maine is actually in a minority of states that doesn't have a central. Shenna's on election night, Shenna's team does not publish the election results. It's actually left to the media outlets, believe it or not.
That's true.
Which is really good for us. We love doing it. It's a lot of fun. We put a lot of thought into it, and we only have access though to that first choice, right? In those elections, we have to, Shenna's office has to take the memory sticks and go look at the second choices. So we will only call a race, right, when we say, we're confident somebody has won 50% or more elections. And that's how you know that someone's won, generally speaking. It isn't until you get to ranked choice voting that the official process will play in. So we're the ones who on election night, if there is a winner, right, will tell you, we'll project the election. And, and we've never been wrong, so. That's how it works, and we're going to try to keep it that way.
Yes, don't be wrong, and hopefully there'll be some really clear outcomes.
It's a pretty good science.
If there aren't, we're here to do that ranked choice voting tabulation. It's very transparent. We streamed it on Facebook in 2022 with Congressional District 2. We had a congressional race. Television cameras are there. Candidates are there. You mentioned strategy. So when I ran for Secretary of State, I think it was a 6-way race. And it was a ranked choice voting race. And so for me, the strategy, I was the last person into the race. So I was calling, and the legislature in Maine elects the Secretary of State. It's a little curious that way. It's Maine, New Hampshire, and Tennessee that do it that way. So I'm calling legislators and saying, I'm running for Secretary of State, I'd like your vote. And a lot of them were like, hey, I've already given my vote to so-and-so. And so my strategy was like, they're great, but can I have your second place vote? And I don't know how many first place votes I got, but I got more second place votes than anybody. I'm certain of it, because I think I was the only one asking for their second place vote. But it worked. Now I'm secretary. And I do think bigger picture strategy, that strategy was one of civility, right? I wasn't tearing down my opponents. I was talking about what I would do as secretary, why I wanted to be secretary, and really trying to make it a win-win,
And in candidate elections, the strategies there's a full range. I mean, there have been candidates who have essentially ignored the ranked choice voting process. In 2018, there was a big Democratic primary for governor, and some of those candidates actually tried to hold hands to actually knock off Janet Mills, who was at the top. Obviously, it didn't work, right? She's now in her second term. But there have been a range of strategies, from ignoring ranked choice voting altogether, rank me and only me. I don't think it really makes that much of a difference. It's still ultimately, and for the most part, about who gets the most first place votes. And then, we've seen some exceptions to that rule, but the first place, first is great if you're a candidate. And it's only when you get into those really deep situations, those really big elections with multiple candidates, that the second round votes will really push you over the top.
That's great. I think, so get ready. I'm going to ask one more question, and then we'll put it over to the students. One of the things we're hearing about, right, is the potential for enormous litigation after the election. And I'm just curious, sort of, how you're thinking as a journalist. How are you going to be covering sort of questions about challenges in the courts and and the calling elections? I mean, you just mentioned you've been wrong, but potentially we're in a very different situation, and Maine could be one of those states. Are you having conversations about how to cover that kind of situation?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of calling elections, the math is the math, right? When we get to a point in an election where we think that there's just not enough votes for a candidate to come back, we're gonna be comfortable calling that election. Actually, in 2020, since we have a different partner than most media outlets, we were actually the first newspaper to call the election for Joe Biden. We got to publish a story a day earlier than most other papers because we called it on, I think, a Friday morning. And we are very comfortable doing that, right? The math is the math, and it played out exactly the way we thought it would. At that point, essentially, Pennsylvania looked like it was in his hands, and we made the call. And people, we got up in the morning, and we also did a story explaining why we did that call. And got a lot of attention, of course, and it was something we felt we had to, give another level of explanation to readers about. Why am I reading this first on the Bangor Daily News when CNN hasn't called the election? People didn't know what to make of that. We love that, but it was a strange situation to be in, and I think, it's incumbent on us to keep the people's trust and explain why we did that. Where, being first in an election isn't just about being first, right? I think it's a really important thing to be able to tell people as early as possible who won the election. And I don't care who wins the election. I just want you to know first. And that was a situation where I think the kind of immense power of the press, especially here in Maine, kind of shows itself. And we punched above our weight. And we're ready to do that again. The math is the math. And in the case of litigation, we don't worry about that at the time of the call. But certainly going forward, we see a lawsuit, we investigate potential issues. We've done that here in Maine before when people have made complaints. It's never been enough to change the outcome of a big election like this. But we'll certainly be on guard. We'll certainly be asking Shenna a lot of questions, and we'll get to the bottom of it. And it's a process. It's really important to keep everyone's trust. I know everyone on your level is thinking about that across the country, and I think we certainly are too.
Well, and that's why we think of the BDN as our political newspaper for the state. So we know where to be tuning in, right, on the election night and beyond. So let's turn to some student questions. I know we have Olivia has got the first question as Colby votes. So let's start with her, and then we'll keep going.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here tonight, both of you. So part of my job, I have the opportunity to speak with a lot of student voters, and sometimes I get backlash or pushback from people who feel dissatisfied with their options especially in the presidential election and especially before Joe Biden withdrew from the race. So I was just wondering what your message would be to voters, especially student voters, who feel discouraged by their options for the presidential election.
It's more a you question, I think.
So I'm going to take off my hat as Secretary of State for a second, because as Secretary of State, Mike said he doesn't care who wins. He just wants to make sure that there's clear, accurate reporting as quickly as possible, that the math and the rationale is conveyed to the public. Similarly, I don't care who wins these elections. From the vantage point as Maine's chief election official, I want as many people to vote as possible from all parties. For whoever you vote for, I don't care. Just get registered and cast your ballot and make your voice heard. As a person, I'm not going to endorse any candidates. This is a nonpartisan event. But what I do want to say is, Allison and I share in common a background in civil rights and civil liberties. I was one of the leaders of Maine's marriage equality campaign, which took us 7 years. to pass marriage equality. I led the statewide referendum campaign for same-day voter registration. And so I think sometimes progress, especially if you're passionate about civil rights or climate justice or economic justice, it can be so frustrating because progress can be so incrementally slow. And we take so many steps backward, right? It's like, really, are we having that same fight again that my mother or my grandmother had? But yes, we are. But I've also witnessed the power of elected officials. And part of the reason I first ran for office, part of the reason I moved out of advocacy into elected office, into government, is I've witnessed firsthand that those votes really do determine everything that we care about. The speed limits on the highways, those are voted on by the legislature for the most part, or set by the administration. But literally, they had a legislative debate on the speed between, I think it was Brunswick and Portland. The amount of public, funding for public education voted on by the legislature. Federal funding voted on by Congress. And issues like marriage equality, issues like climate, all of those come down to votes. So even you might, I think it's a strategy to try to suppress the vote. It's a strategy to tell you your vote doesn't matter. And some of that, unfortunately, is coming from malign sources, including from our foreign adversaries. The federal government just handed down some indictments against different entities, fake media outlets, online entities that were purveying information being spread by Russia. And that sounds like a conspiracy theory, except you can read the indictments and see what was actually happening. Spreading lies to get people discouraged, to get people angry, to convince you not to participate, to give up your power. And ultimately, your vote is your power. It's your vote that then helps determine the outcome, helps keep elected officials accountable, and hopefully helps move us forward as a city, as a state, and as a nation.
Yeah, and I would just add too, I'm a reporter, I'm certainly not here to tell you how to vote, but I think that oftentimes it's much easier for you to learn things about national elections and things like that. There are some really interesting and varied people in the Maine legislature, and of course I cover them, and Shenna knows a lot of them, was one of them. You can have really interesting conversations with people you may not think you agree with, right? And you may share some sort of strange point of agreement. With the ACLU, Shenna had many strange points of agreement, right, with people out there who you may not think would agree with her, right? And I think that's pretty common, right? People are complex, and you learn that talking to voters, you learn that talking to politicians. So I know when people talk about elections, it's easy to be so inundated with national stuff that you kind of don't pay as much attention to state elections, which actually have much more effect on your life and how you actually live day to day. So I would just encourage you to pay attention to what's going on and connect with some folks around here, even folks you may not think you have much in common with.
Great. Next question. We have Serena.
Hi, I'm Serena. I'm a senior from Louisiana. I'm a little curious about the interplay between voter registration and voter education. I know, Shenna, you do a lot on the voter registration side, and so does Colby Votes, but in my mind, if you're going to register voters, there has to be either your organization or civil society has to be responsible for educating those voters. So I was curious about how you both view your role in that kind of dynamic between getting people to the polls and then making sure they're able to make informed decisions once they step into the voting booth.
So with the referendum questions, and Mike mentioned that, so you're actually going to get 2 ballots this year for the state level. You're going to get a candidate ballot that's going to have President, Congress, U.S. Senate on one side, on the other side, the local races. And then you're going to get a referendum ballot with 5 questions. And you get to vote on the Maine state flag, and you get to vote on contributions to political action committees, as well as 3 bond questions that Mike was talking about with R&D, historic buildings, and trails, outdoor trails. So we publish a citizen's guide to the referendum questions on our website. You can just Google Maine Citizens Voter Guide, and you will get the Secretary of State Citizens Guide to the referendum questions. There's a lot of information there. There's the actual laws themselves, so questions are just a summary of actual legal language that's behind them. There are fiscal analyses of exactly how much it's going to cost the state, all of the money involved. There's a plain language interpretation, like what does the question actually mean, written by, prepared by the Attorney General's office. So that's one good place to get information. We do not do candidate information, with one minor exception. We're running a mock election for students, and we've invited the federal candidates in Maine to submit 1 to 2 minute videos to us that are positive, not, just tell us what you believe in. And we are gonna package that in a video that's gonna go out to schools so that they can see, okay, these are the people running for this and that and this other thing. But we don't do a lot of candidate education because that could veer. It's hard to be objective in this world, right? It could veer into advocating for the election or defeat of a candidate, and we would not do that. So we do encourage people, though, to reach out to the candidates themselves. And sometimes you can say, well, why would I trust, why would I trust what that person says? Or one of my uncles was like, all politicians lie. I'm like, uncle, like, I don't. But you can go to their websites, see what they say about themselves. Even if they're exaggerating, there are going to be some pretty clear differences in their publicly stated positions. And I think that can be useful in of itself. And then you can also look at their votes. So if they're incumbents, they've got a voting record. And those votes are very, very clear, crystal clear, especially in the state level.
Yeah, and I would just add, as a media outlet, we have a little more flexibility to get into those the differences between candidates. Every year we send a customized questionnaire to every legislative candidate, and it usually draws from polling, right? The issues that Mainers think, housing is a really huge issue, right? It's been topping the polls recently. So we make sure we ask a question about that and some questions on other things. And we just publish the results. We don't fact check them within that widget, right? We give them 800 characters to answer those questions, and then obviously if we see a trend there, we'll dig into that and do some coverage off of it. But we mix that with service coverage, right? How to get your absentee ballot. We want our readers to be able to avail themselves of all the voting process as well. But so we do a little bit more of a comprehensive voter guide. And of course, my job is to explain what's going on in Maine politics. So it's what we do all year round, but we do it, certainly more intentionally, right, around the election. And we refer to stories that we've done on these subjects. We put it all together for people. So that's how I view my role.
Mike, since you just told us you're going to tell us about all these things, can you tell us now how much are the presidential elections issues, right, that are coming up? Yeah. Immigration, abortion, like some big ones that have been in the debates last night. How much are those issues playing out and impacting the political tenor in Maine?
Yeah, absolutely. You have to think of Maine as many different places, right? We have these 2 congressional districts are moving in totally different directions, right? The first district has become more Democratic, and the second district has become more Republican. Donald Trump's won it twice, right? No Republicans won Maine since 1988. So there's a little push and pull going on in the state, and I think that the things you see across the country, you're seeing here. There's polarization. I think there was an August poll that UNH did in Maine. Your party affiliation is sort of starting to define how you see the world. I think 90% of Republicans in one of those polls said their financial situation was worse than a year ago. Only 14% of Democrats said that. So someone's got to be wrong here, right? 81% of Democrats in August said Harris would win in Maine. 86% of Republicans said Trump will probably win. So it's a toss-up race. Like you see, people are suspending disbelief a little bit, I think, and it's a toss-up election, right? This is going to be really close. It's going to be really close across the board. That's the signal we have right now. So I think you're seeing this trend of polarization happen here. It may not seem as nasty. It may not. We have to live with our neighbors, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, right? Whether we are. But all these trends are there. They're bubbling, and they're not going away. So I think it's pretty clear what we're seeing out there.
Great. All right. What else do we have? Ethan.
Hi, my name is Austin Russell. I'm from Wayland, Massachusetts. I'm a gov major. I'm a sophomore. Trust seems to be something that we miss dearly in our politics these days. Madam Secretary, can you touch on trust in the elections that you run? And Mr. Shepard, can you talk on trust in the media that covers these elections?
So we're really fortunate in Maine that we have strong voter trust in our elections that is represented, I think, in that strong voter participation. When people have questions and concerns about the elections, I always say, then sign up to be a poll worker. Anyone can sign up to be a poll worker. And under Maine law, and this is true in many states, the clerks have to recruit poll workers from both major political parties in equal numbers. So equal numbers of Republicans and Democrats have to be recruited to be working literally at the polls on election day. And of course, you don't have to be a member of a party to also volunteer at the polls. We also have a very robust, very transparent process. So if you don't want to be a poll worker, but you want to watch the process and observe it, I always invite people to consider watching an aspect of the process. This year, for the first time ever, we're going to have people watching logic and accuracy testing of the tabulators that are used to read the ballots in the local towns. That's something that people can watch. They can see that the tabulator is working, that it's not connected to the internet, that there's just a power cord, that it's reading the ballots correctly. Lots of time, there are often observers. You know, when you vote absentee, you're sending your ballot back in an envelope, and sometimes there are conspiracies. Oh, you know, somebody's opening in a back room and they're changing it, or they're throwing it away if they don't like it. Nah, that's not how it happens. In Maine, the clerks, all those envelopes are sealed, right? You seal that envelope. Those stay sealed until an absentee ballot processing date, and that is publicized by the clerks so that the parties come and watch those envelopes be opened. And anybody can watch that. You could go watch it in Waterville if you wanted to. So there are lots of eyes on the process even before Election Day. And on Election Day, anybody can watch as well. When I was a state senator, I ran and won 3 times as a state senator. I always had my volunteers go and watch the count after the polls closed on election night in all 11 towns that I represented. I'm really proud to say I won a district that voted for Donald Trump in 2016 and also voted for me. Confession, I'm a Democrat. So it was, that was something. But I had volunteers at all 11 towns to watch the vote, watch the count, and text me as soon as they knew the results. So you can do that too, just to see how it works. And I think that those processes have really deepened public trust in our elections. I'm not saying that there aren't still some questions. Certainly there are. A lot of that stems from lies and active disinformation campaigns online designed to discourage and depress the vote. So I always say get your facts, and get your facts by going local or going in person.
And about the media, you know, it's something I think about all the time. I mean, I'm from Hollowell. I devoted my life to doing. I want to do the news here. Like I don't want to go to Washington. I want to ultimately build a sustainable news ecosystem in Maine, and I want to be a part of that. And I think that when you meet people, my motto is if I can go have a conversation with everyone, I think they would trust the process and how we do this. I go on conservative radio every Friday. I go wherever I'm asked to go and talk about my work and talk about the business and talk about how it works. We can't do anything, right, without the trust of our readers, sources. Just this week, I was the editor on a story where we kind of uncovered this horrible contractor, right, who had a bunch of court judgments about him, and now more people are coming out of the woodwork. And really, that's what local media does, right? We go and we find problems, and with sunlight, right, we hopefully can help fix them. And I think that around, I'm known for politics coverage, but a lot of these basic functions, there's no one else to do it, right? When we win or if we go away, right, that's not going to happen anymore. And I think that the more we can go out and sell that, that function, we're gonna find a place here forever, and show that we're needed. And that's how I approach the job every day.
Wilson? And I will get to the back because I saw someone there.
Hi, I'm Wilson. I'm a sophomore from Oklahoma. I've always been interested in Maine and Vermont's commitment to felon voting. It seems like a unique hill to maybe not to die on, but to defend. And so my question is, like, how would you pitch that how open it is to the other 48 states, and why do you think it reflects the values of Mainers?
When you make the decision that everyone who is a United States citizen and is 18 or over has the right to vote, no exceptions, you get away from deciding who does or doesn't deserve to vote, right? If you just say everyone who's a citizen or resident and 18 years or older can. And so that is, it's simple, and it's simple for voters, it's simple for the public. If you start to get into a debate about this person is or isn't eligible, well, where does that end ethically, morally? And of course, many states, 48 states, do make those determinations, right, at different junctures, and it varies all across the country. But I think an unfortunate aspect of that is, you know, what are the reasons people don't vote? Like, why don't we have 100% voting? Well, people don't vote if they get confused. If they think that they're going to do something wrong if they vote, they're not going to vote. Like, why risk it? And so when you have this patchwork of laws that's really confusing about whether you can or you can't vote, then your average person who's not that into politics or government or media is just going to be like, you know what? I'm not going to bother. But meanwhile, decisions are being made that impact every aspect of their lives, from their transportation infrastructure to their salaries and wages to whether they can get health care or not, their freedom over their own body. Like, so they give up that power. So that's the argument I make to other states. Some states are really interested in it. They're interested in the mechanics. And one of the mechanics that's interesting in Maine, your right to vote isn't rooted in where you're incarcerated. It's rooted in where you came from before incarceration. So if you lived in Maine before you were incarcerated in Maine, you have the right to vote. If you lived outside of the state and you got picked up in Maine for committing a crime and you're incarcerated in Maine for that crime, you don't have the right to vote in Maine. And so when we actually literally, I myself visited the correctional facilities last week in Charleston and Warren, and this week in Windham, and we verify their address with the correctional facility to look at where they were living prior to incarceration. And then we look them up in the voter registration system to see if they're already registered. If they are, we just give them an absentee ballot application. They fill it out. We get it to the clerks, and then they get their ballots in the mail. If they're not registered, they can register to vote there. And we, you know, back to the question of like, why should people vote? We say to them, look, it's your right to decide whether you want to vote or not. But think about it. If it weren't important, would people work so hard to make it so you couldn't? So that is usually a pretty good argument, and we get a lot of voter participation. And it is, it's incredible.
And I'll just add that this has been debated, of course, in the legislature over the years. Not much. I don't really remember the last time that this law has been debated, but it's really a function of Maine's history. And if you were to propose it in another state, of course, it would be controversial. But it hasn't been particularly controversial here. So just for context.
Great. I think, Alfonso, you have a question in the back, but I don't know if you're good.
Hi, my name is Alfonso. I'm a junior. I'm a poll worker myself, and I've been working since 2020, so thank you so much for that. I wanted to ask about how you deal with rurality in Maine. I think it's so fascinating that you have like a really high voter count, and I come from Texas, so that's kind of interesting how from a bigger town we have less votes by proportion. So I want to know, how do you deal with rurality here in Maine, and how do you get so many people to vote? I think that's so fascinating.
One thing that I find really fascinating, and I'm curious about your perspective, Mike, on this as well, because I think the BDN does a really good job with providing service to rural areas. One thing that I find fascinating is that every state is different, and that the vast majority of the states are doing elections at the county level with vote centers. And in Maine and most of New England, all of New England, we do voting at the municipal level in the cities and towns. So we have about 500 municipalities. Now the smaller municipalities, sometimes they'll share a clerk. Today I was having lunch with the president of the Clerks Association. He's the clerk for the town of Weston, and Weston also oversees voting for the town next door of Orient, and I can't remember how many voters he said they had, 40 or 50. And he also does an unorganized township, which is a feature of Maine, towns that aren't formally organized as towns. I think it was Bancroft Township, which has like even fewer voters. I'm getting the numbers wrong, but not very many voters. So when you're doing it at the town level, there is a very personal connection, I think, between your local officials and the people that live in that city or town. And it also eliminates some of the political, decisions about where vote centers are or are not, right? There was recently some national news about not insufficient vote centers out west in certain Native American tribal lands. And in Maine, again, it's by municipality. So you're going to find a polling location pretty close to where you live.
Yeah, I think part of this is just the regional culture as well. I mean, going back to the history of how our towns were founded, right? There was a common, there was a church, and we handle all these things on the local level, like Shenna said. There are things to vote for in your own town, right? That you have a vested interest in. We have so many elected officials here. I want to get a count of them someday, right down to the road commissioners in some of these places. So I think that Maine's history really plays a role in that. Texas was a frontier place, right? Towns weren't formed the way towns were formed here, around a center, and it was more individual. And I think that New England has high voter turnout in part because of that kind of communitarianism, and I think that's why you see this stretching into today.
It's like one of our former speakers, Colin Woodard, who was here last spring.
That's a great
to talk
question
about,
for
right?
Colin.
To,
yeah.
talk about the regional impact or sort of communities and how it's affected our voting, how we vote. Other questions from the Tommy?
Thank you. Thank you both for being here. My name is Tommy, and I'm a sophomore. So, Secretary Bellows, this question's for you. In December, you were the first state official in history to remove a presidential candidate from the ballot via the 14th Amendment. Following Supreme Court ruling in March, you reversed this removal. What was going through your mind at this time, and do you think that this ruling was fair and just?
It's a great question.
So I think what's important is, as Secretary of State, I swore an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution and the laws, both of the nation and of the state. And so the only consideration that I could have when I made my decision in December was the Constitution and the evidence. Now, Maine, this is curious, and a lot of folks don't realize this. I'm sure you do, because you're familiar with the situation, but Maine, to my knowledge, is the only state that has this law that requires that the Secretary of State verify that every candidate on the primary ballot meet the qualifications of the office that they seek. Now, this law came about because a state legislator was running, someone I actually know, and she was angry because she thought her opponent didn't live in her town. She's like, how is it that my opponent doesn't live in my town? So she went to my predecessor, Matt Dunlap, and she said, this person doesn't live in my town. They have to live in their town to be a legislator. You should kick her off the ballot. And the secretary said, my job is just ministerial. I just put the names on the ballots. If they have the signatures, there's nothing I can do. Well, she got elected. She won. And she said, I'm going to put in a bill. So she put in a bill into the legislature that, again, requires that the secretary verify that the candidates meet the qualifications of the office they seek. Sailed through the Judiciary Committee. She was the only person that testified. We researched the legislative history. Only person that testified in favor. Nobody testified against it. It passed unanimously in the committee. And then it did in the House and Senate something that happens in Maine. It went under the hammer. So it was basically essentially unanimous with no legislative history around that bill. Well, the language of that was really clear. It said shall. And it also was very prescriptive. It says the secretary has to hold a hearing as soon as a citizen raises a challenge to the qualifications of a candidate within 5 days, and then must issue a decision within a week of the conclusion of the hearing. So based on the law, which I swore an oath to uphold, I held a hearing. Both sides had attorneys. They presented evidence. They presented their arguments around the Constitution. There was no Supreme Court precedent at the time on that specific question of the presidential Section 3 of 14th Amendment qualifications of the ballot. So I utilized the facts and the arguments that were presented in the hearing. That's the only thing that I could utilize in making my decision, and I issued my decision, knowing full well that there was an appeals process to the courts. That was part of the law as well. And I said from the very beginning, I will abide by the rule of law, because I think what's important wasn't my feelings or anybody's feelings. It's what does the law and the Constitution tell us. So, Mr. Trump appealed, and the US Supreme Court ruled that the states didn't have the authority to bar a candidate under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. And pursuant to the US Supreme Court ruling, it was remanded to me, and I reversed my decision on that piece of my ruling. Of course, he was on the ballot and is on the ballot. And I think that's really important. If all of you who are studying government, you're interested in elected office, first, you should run. You should run as soon as you graduate. There's some really young, awesome legislators. But second, at the end of the day, if you're in this work, whether it's advocacy or government or politics, you have to do right by yourself and what your own code of conduct and values are. And so for me, what was most important was that oath to uphold and defend the Constitution. Now, the threats that came afterward, the doxing and the swatting, I was doxed, my home was swatted. That was unacceptable. That was a really difficult time personally, but that's, and I hope that we will see the end of politically motivated violence in our nation soon. I hope I hope people take a deep breath and reconsider some of where people have gone in reactions to decisions that electeds make. So.
Other questions?
Well, I'll chime in. I appreciate your response to that, because I was wondering the exact same thing, and I'm so sorry to hear that you have to deal with all that at your home, and it's not ideal, absolutely. Well, I am going to kind of direct this toward Mike. Sure. It's no secret that Maine is a clean energy, climate action leader, right? And with that being said, I know we promised all of you that we'd talk a little bit about issues on the ballot, so I wanted to bring this up. Mm-hmm. Environmental issues now are at the peak. They are on top of everyone's mind, I would say, at least my own as an environmental policy kid. But with that being said, how significantly do you think these environmental issues are affecting, I'd say, local elections in Maine specifically? More importantly, how are they playing a role in, I guess, shaping voter priorities when showing up to the polls?
Yeah, Maine's a really interesting state on this issue. There are conservation groups. There are sportsmen's groups who are really interested in conservation, and of course, the sportsmen's groups may have different ideas about guns than some of the groups that they are allied with on conservation. So Maine is a state that values its clean air and clean water, recreation for all of all types, and I think that you see that that's a through line in the legislature certainly. And there's some really big issues on this topic, right? Offshore wind development in the Gulf of Maine is a huge topic right now. That there are big stakes on the ballot as well there. The Donald Trump has basically said that he doesn't want that, right? So there's real stakes there. We've had whole elections on this question as well. We've had the battle over the Central Maine Power Corridor, right? There's a lot of push and pull between, do we want to put a corridor that may bring, cleaner energy, but there's a trade-off there, and that corridor lost at the ballot box, but it was revived by the courts. So Maine has some really interesting, natural advantages, right? That put us into this conversation. And these are some of the hottest issues in our politics today. So there are big stakes on the ballot, of course, for some of that, and a lot of it is just sometimes consensus right here, and something that Republicans and Democrats can get behind. So there's an interesting dynamic there.
As a follow-up to that, sort of picking back on some of the other questions, and Secretary, you were mentioning as well, right, that when you were elected, you won in a red district, although you're a blue candidate. And at the ACLU, right, you had lots of alliances across the thing. You see, historically in Maine, you would see alliances in the legislature. You wouldn't necessarily see straight ticket voting in local issues and all of a sort of regional approach. how much are we losing that? Are you still recovering it? Like, how are you seeing a dramatic change in that? Do you still think it's possible? And if it's still possible, how do we support that kind of, sort of compromise and an ability to actually find solutions to problems? And I think we get a lot of frustration, right? That voters say no one's doing anything, but yet then they're really aligned with only their party. So it's sort of like it's like a catch-22, right? We want compromise, but then we're all entrenched in our political parties. So, like, you've been covering Maine for a long time. Like, where do you see the trend going?
I still see Maine as somewhere that lives somewhere in the middle. I mean, they do not want some level of consensus, but just like Congress has gone, the legislature has certainly gone in different directions, right? Democrats vote more with Democrats now than they did 10 years ago, and same with Republicans. There are people that are less willing to cross the line. That's probably just a function of the systems that are creating, right, politicians. I think that we still have that on certain issues, though, of course. I think a really interesting issue over the last couple of years has been tribal sovereignty, tribal rights, and we've actually seen this evolve just over the last 4 years, I would say. At first it was more of a progressive cause, really a subset of Democrats. Janet Mills is one of the folks that has been opposed to the tribal rights push that's before the Maine legislature now. But in the past session, right, House Minority Leader Billy Bob Falkenham, a more libertarian-leaning Republican, was standing with House Speaker Rachel Talbot Ross, and there were some in both parties that were opposed to that. So I think you definitely still see on some issues these bipartisan alliances. There's also bipartisan opposition to things like that. So Maine is complex, and I think there's a lot of history behind a lot of these issues, environmental issues, and certainly this one which is fraught with history. But in the aggregate, of course, you see less of it. But from day to day, you can go into the legislature and find any number of issues that people are working really hard on in a bipartisan way. And so I think that if you're looking for that, there are plenty of places to look for hope, even though it's certainly a more polarized environment than it was a decade ago, certainly 50 years ago.
What's your perspective from being in the state legislature and just being in Maine for so long?
Yeah, so I run the Bureau of Motor Vehicles as well as elections and corporations and archives. And on transportation issues, almost always, not always, but almost always, we're getting bipartisan or even unanimous votes. So we have an agency bill every year to look at different transportation issues that we want fixed from the BMV's perspective, the transportation budget. And that's pretty impressive. And I think it's a testament to people still being able to work together. And even, the rhetoric can be pretty hot, and that's sensational. And so for good reasons, when there's conflict, that makes headlines. But I had really strong working relationships this past legislative session, despite a lot of media attention in the winter that maybe reflected some polarization. Really good working relationships with Republicans on the other side of the aisle to advance technology modernization for the BMV, to move forward some initiatives, that I'm really excited about, a mobile BMV where we could just have a BMV in a van and pull up and give licenses to people. We're working on that because we want to make it convenient and accessible for rural populations, for students, for seniors, for veterans. So those types of things, we're still working with Republicans, even as a Democratic Secretary of State. And that I feel a lot of hope on. And then on elections, so I talk about how awesome Maine is, and Maine is #1, and we are going to be #1 in 2024. That being said, I have so much confidence in my colleagues across the country. I have so much confidence in my colleagues who are Republican Secretaries of State across the country. I believe our elections are going to be free, fair, and secure in 2024, all across this nation, just as they were in 2020. We may disagree on voting rights policy, on who can and who can't vote, but on the rule of law, on following the law and implementing fair elections so that every eligible voter can vote and know that their vote is counted fairly, complete confidence regardless of where people are coming from.
I'm going to take the prerogative of last question as a moderator. Hope that's okay. Both of you have had lots of opportunities, lots of choices in your careers of what you could have done, but you've both stayed completely committed to service. whether elected or in journalism. And I'd just love to know, when you were making those decisions, like early on, our students have to make these decisions now. And there's lots of great opportunities in the private sector. There's lots of great opportunities in lots of sectors. But you all chose a very specific government approach and covering the government. Tell us why.
I haven't found another job I think I'd like as much. I think that's one of the problems. No, I mean I'm really committed to. I had my dad's side of the family all came from where I'm from. I feel my grandfather was the mayor of Hallowell. My dad was the city councilor. I grew up in a place where where the lawmakers hang out. They drink in Hallowell. There's a lot of I wanted to be a part of it, and I think that. That's what led me here, and it's a really fun job. You get to talk to people all day, and then write history at the end. So I think that I'm really thinking about moving the industry forward here and trying to find a sustainable path. And we need people who know this state. They may be from here, they may not be, but we need to keep them in this industry and give them a growth. A path of growth, and it's certainly something I think about when I think of the reporters I manage and some of the other folks in the newsroom. We need to pass along the knowledge we have, so history could be written in 10 years as well. There's a lot of institutional memory that's been lost in journalism. I mean, our newsroom is about a quarter of the size, right, that it was in the early 2000s, and here we are, sort of guarding the door. I feel a real sense of urgency when I think about that, and certainly makes me want to stay in it even longer.
So I grew up in Hancock, Maine, and we were really poor. We didn't have electricity or running water until I was in the 5th grade. But I have always been a geek about democracy. I had a poster of the Bill of Rights on my bedroom wall when I was a kid. And now I have a reproduction of the original Maine Constitution, and another geeky fun part of my job is I'm like the guardian of the original 1820 Maine Constitution in the archives. So I walk in and I see that reproduction and I'm like pinch myself because it's just so cool to get to work on the mechanics of democracy. Shout out to my communications director, Emily Cook, Colby alum, is in the back. I'm also joined by my youth engagement coordinator, Vanessa Diaz-Gomond. But I highly recommend government. If you are someone who's passionate, you mentioned the environment, if you're passionate about a particular issue and you want to see positive change, it may be heartbreaking, you may get threats, but you can actually have the power to, that old adage, be the change that you wish to see in the world, you can do that in government. So to the Colby Votes Fellows, to everyone who is here, you have the skills and the abilities to make a huge difference. And so there's nothing more exciting than getting to do work that is meaningful, to feel like you're making a difference, and to be part of history, and then have it be written about, I guess, if you're doing a good job.
Or if you're doing a really bad job.
Well, you're both making a huge difference, and we're super grateful that you took time to come spend with us. And we're really grateful for Docs for his excellent moderation, and so grateful that you all came out in the almost midterm week. And so with that, I hope you'll join us next week, and a big round of applause for our amazing guests.